Final Fantasy is a beloved series that has fascinated, enamored, and touched people all over the world for almost 35 years. Many people have their favourites, and I feel like most of them, like 75% of them, would be between 6 and 10, with another giant chunk of that straggling between 4 and 12. The series has been going strong since its first release, with some ups and downs, but 35 years later it is still standing strong as one of the best, if not the best, JRPG franchise of all time. Between its stories, its worlds, its characters, its lore, and so many other things, this is a series that has stood the test of time, with people still passionately in love with games, even after such a long time. And with plenty of new games going strong too. But between the biggest ones and the most beloved and popular ones, and even between some of the hated ones, there is one that feels to have slipped under the radar for way too long. One that just seems forgotten, and that nobody seems to care about. That nobody seems to talk about or appreciate. And I think that is unwarranted. I am talking, of course, about Final Fantasy III. What I feel is the most underrated, underappreciated, and possibly the most influential important game in the entire franchise. So please join me in talking about why I feel like this game deserves as much love as some of the other top games in the entire series. I am mostly going to try to focus this into 5 specific categories: story, world, characters and design, mechanics, inside of battle and out, and graphics / presentation. There will be some overlap, of course, but these are some of the main areas where I think this game shines. So let's begin with the story. This game is more akin to the Final Fantasy I way of doing things, where you're just dropped into the world with a basic text scroll that basically tells you the crystals have sunk, something called a Gargan has prophesied that this is just an omen of things to come, the darkness is going to spread, and 4 nameless blank slate orphans go into a cave, not expecting that they will be touched by the crystal to become the warriors of light. And when I say it's more similar to Final Fantasy I, that's what I mean. It doesn't have 4 important named characters with distinct personalities like in the second one. They all start out as onion warriors or onion knights. And throughout the game, while you can change their look and appearance and job class, they're complete blank slates. When you're talking to people in dialogue, it doesn't even show which character is talking because it doesn't matter. You can almost pretend that it's just one character to represent the entire party, because other than that they literally do not have personalities. After you get out of the cave, you start off in your hometown. Like I said, you're all orphans, so you have these kind of foster parents. I don't know if they took you in or if they legally adopted you or if they kidnapped you. It doesn't really come into it. Once you leave this town, you don't come back to the very end unless you want to. And when I say the story is more akin to Final Fantasy I mean in a sense that you will go from place to place solving one thing in one location before moving on to the next, and then you're doing the next. But it's more like Final Fantasy 2. In what you're doing, it connects to the world at large more. In Final Fantasy 1, you will go to a dwarf, you will talk to him, he will give you one text box quest. He will tell you he wants a certain type of rock. You will go to get that rock, you will come back, and then he will give you an item or a location or open a location where you'll do that again. It doesn't really have any bearing on the overall world as much as Final Fantasy 3. What it is, you will meet a character who you'll bring into a tower so he can be the one to save the floating continent from falling, which is only basically happening because the world is in peril. It all feels more connected instead of just doing vague fetch quests until you unlock more story to get to the crystals. Of course, the crystals are important in this game. You will go from the wind to the water to the fire and then to the earth, usually each having a different character to accompany you along the way. Like any early Final Fantasy like these, especially the first 3, the story is mostly a background compared to later games especially. You're not going to be stuck into 10 minutes of cutscene in this game. Of course, this is a JRPG, a story is still a big thing. I don't want to spoil the whole, so I'm not going to go through the entire story. All I would really say is, you go from place to place, throughout this broken world on the brink of ruin, meeting new characters along the way, which I wouldn't say are quite as relevant as Final Fantasy 2. There's no character you're going to keep coming back to in this. I'd say it's probably some of the best elements of 1 and two's story. In the end, it all does come together in a surprisingly emotional and beautiful way, where the characters are important, where little things will just make it more meaningful than anything in the first one. There's even little bits of background story about 4 dark warriors who had to save the world from overflowing with light, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's what they took as inspiration for the Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. And when you do defeat the final boss in this game, unlike with Final Fantasy II's ending, it dies. Like in Final Fantasy 1, when you defeat the final boss, the screen shakes and it really dies. That's one thing I missed in 2. It's a proper event when you finally kill it. So story-wise, while nothing overly special compared to something like 7 or 10, it works. I loved it. And for something that's definitely more of a background detail to the gameplay, I think it's perfect. I think one of the most important parts of a very old school RPG like this is its world. The dungeons you explore, the open world you will traverse, how you traverse it, what you will find, etc. First off, and big thing about giving this world a bit more personality and importance, they finally show the name of a town or a dungeon when you enter it. It's no longer just something you might find somewhere on a sign. It's going to show up at the top of the screen to show you this is a town, it's an important place that you should know the name of every time. So there's no more of this, oh, I need to go to this town. Where is it? Then you check the town, you check a sign, wrong place, move on. It's a bit faster, and I think it helps you to remember the names of places a lot more. And it definitely helps that it's a lot more interactive. Characters move around a lot more, they look a lot more varied, which we'll get to in a while. You can interact with things like touching a candle will sometimes open a hidden pathway. Sometimes your character will just say ouch. Or characters having a dance party when you play the piano well. A lot more secret hidden pathways that actually give you meaningful rewards, such as a lot of gil or spells that you can't access at that point, making these hidden secret pathways worth looking for. There's also many different ways to traverse this world. You get the airship like 20 minutes into the game, but it blows up when you crash into a rock. Your ship, the thing you sail around with, turns into an airship later on when somebody helps you transform it. Like, that's the kind of stuff I love in terms of Final Fantasy transportation. There's not enough things like that. And when I say there's more ways to traverse the world, I don't just mean in terms of airships or anything like that. There's things like a mini village, which you can only enter if you cast mini to make your whole party small, and it's an adorable little thing. It's not like one of those things where it just tells you you're small and it's all the same size. No, these are actually tiny. Also, when your characters are minied or toaded in battle and they die, it looks wonderfully funny. Unfortunately, unlike Final Fantasy 2, the mini character doesn't run off the screen, but I think this makes up for it. Just look at this thing. How can that not get a laugh? You have to turn into a frog to get into an underwater dungeon. It's little things like that I absolutely... It just amplifies the game's personality, charm, and makes you love it that little bit more. It gives you your first proper airship you can actually go inside. And when I say go inside, I mean as an area, not just fly it around. You can buy stuff like items, weapons, spells inside there. You can fly it around. You can sleep in there. There's a storage unit. It's your new home base at that point. You have a new place to call your own. And once you get this airship, not only can you use it to do all that stuff I just mentioned, it means you can finally go to find some secret bosses, to find some secret summons, which again we'll get to in a while. And you don't have to do any of this, but it will definitely make the end game a lot easier. Because this is probably the hardest Final Fantasy game I've played. So definitely keep that in mind. You will die a few times at the start of this, probably. You can even use the airship to do what I can only describe as almost a platforming puzzle. And you can get into some wild encounters here at specific spots. And every time you do, it shoots a cannon at the enemies, which the first time I saw, I was so stupidly excited. I was like, I couldn't believe that happened. It does like 3/4 of their health, and it's a lot of fun to see. So compared to any Final Fantasy sin before this, the world design is definitely a lot more of a world. It's a lot more interactive, it's a lot more variety, and it definitely makes it feel a lot more significant. In fact, when you get off the floating continent, which at the start you might think is your entire area, your entire map, no. You do a dungeon in this whole new expansive watery area, which is nothing but water at first, but once you do the quest and once you do the dungeon, it rises from the submerged depths that it was in, and you have this whole new 10 times bigger area to explore. People seem to give 6 a lot of praise for changing its layout, its world, its overworld at some point, but 3 did it first on the NES, and I think that's really impressive. It also has the first massive area in the entire franchise. Salonia is the first massive giant city, and even though it's split into 4 sections probably because the NES couldn't handle it, it's still massively impressive, and it's the first time to have a huge... Usually everything was a tiny town. Now for the character and design, which I think is some of its biggest improvements. And this applies to the main story related characters and the enemy design. And like I said, the characters are blank slates, but having like 24 different jobs and everyone has a unique sprite, you can switch between them, switch between the characters to see what they look like in the overworld, definitely helps to make the story feel like your own. You have your own characters, there's in whatever sprite you want them to be in. And like I already touched on things like the dancing girls part in when you play the piano, but overall, the amount of sprites and character designs in this game might be like 10 times that of any of the previous games. You can look at any main named character in this game and probably tell who they are just by the sprite alone. And like I already said, they join you on your quests sometimes. Usually for a while, they'll follow you around on the world map, they'll follow you around in the towns, but they also have a little bit of more detailed artwork in the menu. This is the first game, I think, where Sid is way more of a character. He was in 2, but I don't think he was nearly as much of a character in that. He is, of course, the one who gives you your first airship until it blows up. And then he follows you back to his hometown, where he has to go back to his wife, which he calls Granny, which is really bizarre, but whatever. There's also characters like Prince Alice, who's like 6, I think, and who you help to save his home city after his dad, the king, is kind of possessed. So you have to basically help this 6-year-old to become king. Princess Sarah, of course, who pretty much makes it very clear from the start she wants you bad. Which I guess if you made all your characters female, you could argue... I won't go there. But every single one of these characters are memorable. None of them... I feel like if you show me any now, I probably couldn't remember their names based on a sprite alone, because while distinct, they're all pretty basic. And characters like Dorga and Un, who are really important throughout the story, they all really impacted a lot. Like I said, kind of a mix between 1 and 2. All of these characters really help add to it and make it such an amazing experience overall. But let's switch sides. Yes, the human characters, the story, they're all great, they're all cool, but the enemy design in this game, the variety, the design in itself, everything, is not only one of the best so far, possibly the best since. Not necessarily variety wise, but at least creatively, I think they're my favourite ever. First off, like Final Fantasy 1 and 2, they do definitely repeat and just palette swap to make them stronger as the game goes on. But it definitely takes a lot longer to do this than the other 2. Characters like the Ohishuki, Hermit, Crocata, Garb, Eater, I had to stop writing them down afterward because there's some of these, even endgame enemies, would just blow me away with their design. And the final boss, again, not spoiling anything, it's cool, it's fine. It's no Final Fantasy 1 final boss, but it's definitely better than 2. But like I said, in terms of some of these designs, easily my absolute favourite designs, maybe in the entire franchise, definitely in the first 3 games so far. Speaking of enemies, let's get into the mechanics. This is where I think this game shines in a lot of ways compared to the first 2. The changes, the quality of life improvements, so many little things just make this game so much more bearable. And they're the kind of things you wouldn't notice as much if you just went back now. But if you go from the first or the second one to this one, trust me, they are so much more appreciated. The battle system is pretty much the same as any of the other two. You attack, you defend, depending on certain levels of things, you will attack a certain amount of times. In that, you have magic, you can run. In that regard, it's the same. But here's where the quality of life comes in. First off, the job system. For a massive variety in battle, there's a total of 24 jobs, I believe. Everything from knights, which are good with swords, Vikings, who are good with axes, white wizard, black wizard, to use different kinds of magic, conjurers, and summoners, because yes, this is the first game in the franchise to have summons. And while I'm not a huge fan of the job system, I think it's overwhelming as hell. I know for a lot of people it's an iconic part of the Final Fantasy franchise, despite really not appearing much, at least in terms of switching jobs. You can finally check what spells do before using them outside of battle if you click on them. And finally, after 1 and 2 not letting you do this, it's a huge relief. If you attack an enemy, the same enemy with 4 different characters, if the first character kills that enemy in the first 2 games, you will attack the empty spot and nothing will happen. In this game, it finally just switches up to the next target, which is such a time saver. Especially when you go back to weaker areas and you just kind of want to tap X through the battle to get away faster. This doesn't apply to magic, however. If you cast Blizzard on the same enemy with 4 characters and it dies on the first move, it will still attack the empty spot. Or if you use Cure on a party member who dies before you get to use it, which I think is fair enough. Speaking of magic, that has improved drastically. Not only is the animation a lot flashier and more unique, again, in the first 2, if you use magic like fire on 4 different enemies, it would attack them all really slowly. It would like fire, hit, damage, done. Next enemy, fire, hit, damage, done. It would treat every attack like its own unique spell, and it slowed things down to a crawl if you were ambushed by all magic enemies. But now it just hits all the enemies fast, damage appears on every enemy at the same time. I cannot explain how appreciated this is after going from the second and the first one to this one. You can also take magic away from your party members without having to completely get rid of it. You can just put it back in your item slot. Because again, like the first 2, you buy magic and equip it like that. And the magic is back to a Final Fantasy 1 system, where you have certain amount of magic per level. Like level 1 could be Cure, Fire, Blizzard, and you only have 4 slots, and then level 2 is other spells, so you have to kind of prioritize what you want. One of my biggest issues though with the new mechanics, especially with the job system, if you want to change your job, you have to remove all your equipment, which you can not only slows it down and makes you not want to experiment as much, you cannot do if your item slots are full, which once again, you do not have a lot of. You also cannot change your equipment if you don't have enough spots, because you have to remove a piece of equipment before you can equip another one. You don't just switch into menus. So that can be pretty annoying if you have too many slots as well, because you're just stuck with what you have. You can't even check stuff. So not every change is good, but yeah. Also, the damage in this game is like a lot of things are random and inconsistent. When I was using jump, for example, sometimes we would do 50, sometimes a few hundred, sometimes 1,000. 50 to 1,000 on the same level on the same boss, because I kept dying, is a massive leap. I've also died because the turn order seems to be random. Sometimes all my characters will go first, then the enemy. Sometimes the enemy will attack first, which in the end game got me killed at least a few times. Because while I tried to cure myself, I was dead before I got a chance to see anybody move. And an enemy would just use 2 really powerful attacks in a row before I could do anything. Like I already said, summons are in this game too, which is amazing because I had no idea about this when I started. I thought they came in 4. You have your classics like Titan, Ifrit, Shiva, Bahamut. They're all here. Bahamut, Odin, and Leviathan are actually all optional battles that you have to fight to get. So that's really cool. Another first for the series. The Conjurer and Summoners both can do that. Conjurers are weaker forms, and I thought that was it. But no, the Summoners come in later and can use the iconic moves like Ifrit's Hellfire or Shiva's Diamond Dust. The Conjurer will use weaker moves that can only attack one enemy or sometimes heal you. You will level up the same as any other Final Fantasy mostly, but you also have a job level which is individual to every job. It will affect how many times you will hit with your attacks, how powerful your black magic, your white magic, and basically everything outside of just basic stats. So while it has some problems, overall, the improvements massively outweigh the negatives. Which of course brings me to the graphics and the presentation. This is a big leap from the first two, because graphically it's like they pushed the NES completely to its limit. With Final Fantasy 1 to 2, it felt like it didn't get more powerful, but they learned how to use it better. The experience helped. With 2 to 3, it's such a huge leap in everything graphically that it's kind of unbelievable. The mountains are no longer just white background looking things. You can actually tell they're mountains now. Like it has, like I said already, significantly more sprites, more varied artwork. It all just looks better. The spells are more flashy and unique. Summon animations are cool. Just watching things like the entire world re-emerge from underwater. The character sprites move better. Like I said, there's like 24 jobs and a lot of them move completely differently. The Black Wizard and White Wizard will move with more of a refined look. Some of them will move with a bit more aggression to them. Some will seem a bit more lazy. Some of them move with a bit more of a pep in their step. It's all just slightly better, but in a way that goes really far, especially animation wise. There's really not a ton to say about graphical improvements, at least on my side, because I don't know the ins and outs of all of this, but it really just adds to how much of a jump there is between 2 and 3. With Final Fantasy 1 to 2, there was like a year minus a day in between them. With this, there was a year and a few months, and it really does feel like those 4 or so months helped a ton. Like, it really propelled it forward a long way. There's a fantastic ongoing series called The Animation of Final Fantasy on the channel New Frame Plus, which goes into this kind of stuff with a lot more detail and expertise than I have, into all the graphics, the animations, the limitations, and it's currently up to Final Fantasy 4, and I didn't watch the third one until I finished the game, so it was definitely nice to see somebody who knows a lot more about this stuff pick up on and notice a lot of the things I did too. So definitely check that out if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Anyway, that's it. I hope I did an okay job expressing why I think this game is such an underappreciated and important game to the franchise. So many improvements, so many firsts for the series that became staples later on. Everything here just seems more impressive and big, which is obviously something the Final Fantasy franchise will become known for, more so in the future. Especially from like 4 onwards. And I really hope people give this game more appreciation now that it's on the pixel remasters for people to play a lot easier. I don't really know how much about how the pixel remasters are being received, especially 3, because I feel like it's the one most people haven't played. Even with 1 and 2, they've played on the Game Boy Advance ports, or the PS1, or even the PSP. Anything after 4 has gotten plenty of them as well. But this one, I feel like it's been left behind. And it's really, really sad to see, because it's, as I've said before, one of the most, if not the most, underappreciated, underrated, important game in the franchise. I admit that I am also guilty of writing this game off, and I really thought it would be the one I wouldn't care about and would just be the worst one. But I was completely wrong, and I'm honestly happy to say that. I hope more people will give this a chance and come to appreciate and love it as much as I did. Because after this, it really has become one of my absolute favourite Final Fantasies. Which is a lot because it is my favourite franchise of all time, and I've surpassed so many games that I've played and loved for years. So that should really say a lot about how much this game impacted me. Thank you for watching. I doubt many people see this, but if I can get even one person to give this game the appreciation it deserves and not to write it off like they might have, like I did, it has all been worth it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you for the next one of whatever this was. Goodbye.